All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started because I have some introductory information to share with all of you on our session. Hello to everyone. So excited that you're all here. We're so appreciative of you honoring us with your time. We know that we're in a very interesting situation right now with COVID-19, and the fact that you're taking the time out to spend this time with us, we are really, really grateful for. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the series in general. This is I want to welcome you to the CAAASA UCLA CCE Advancing Equity in an Era of Crisis webinar series. The California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators, or CAAASA, and the University of California, Los Angeles Center for the Transformation of Schools put this project together to support equity in virtual learning as we all shelter in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This work has been made possible by the generous support of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE. We're grateful for their partnership on behalf of California's K-12 public school students. At the end of our live session today, I'm going to ask you to complete a survey to evaluate our time together. If you're watching a recording of our earlier session, please complete the survey as well. And like I mentioned, I'll send that link out toward the end of the session. What I want to also share is that if you have a question about today's presentation, what I want to make sure you keep in mind is that you'll have the opportunity after today's session to go to the website that I'll share later to submit follow-up questions. And so please know that if you're not able to engage with your question today, you'll definitely have the link to go on and share your question a little bit later on, and you'll receive the resources from today's session as well. So please know that if you add something in the chat box and we're not able to address it, you have the opportunity to share that feedback a little bit later. The other piece I want to say too, which I learned the other day, is when you're when you're sharing comments, make sure when you're looking to share your comment that you send it, if you want everyone in the session to be able to see, like if you're sharing resources or things like that, please select all panelists and attendees. If you send it only to all panelists, only Shaun and I will be able to see it. So keep that in mind as well. And let me go ahead and transition into telling you about today's wonderful session. Our session today is called Systematically Communicating the Needs and Experiences of African American Students and Families During COVID-19. This webinar will focus on social and digital media strategies that educators and families can use to raise public consciousness about ways schools are underserving African American students during COVID-19. Emphasis will be placed on systematically conveying what these students and their families are experiencing, as well as on what their needs and expectations are. The webinar will be as much about digital coalition building as it is about using tech tools and social media for strategic communication. And to let you know a bit about our facilitators today, Shaun Harper is a professor in the Rossier, hopefully I'm saying that right, School of Education at the University of Southern California. He is also executive director of the USC Race and Equity Center and president of the American Educational Research Association, or AERA. And so we are so honored to be here with you today. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. And I'm here to help with the chat and to help you navigate things as the session proceeds.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to spend this time with you. And I join Africa in thanking you for honoring us with your time today to engage in what I think is a really important conversation around systematic communication and coalition building. Let me say why I decided to frame today's webinar in this way. I mean, I certainly have been thinking about, all parts of COVID-19 and its impact on African-American communities. But there's a thing that's been happening, I think, in the coverage around the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on African-American community health. I was actually encouraged about 2 weeks ago when finally the news coverage about the disparate rates of infection and certainly the disproportionality in deaths among Black communities finally started getting, the kinds of attention that it needed in the national news media. I certainly am grieving for the collective us and for, people that I personally know who have lost family members and people that they care about. So on the one hand, I'm very much discouraged by the disproportionality. But on the other hand, I am at least encouraged that, that particular part of COVID-19, finally started getting some media attention. I think it is time for us to think about how we as a collective might also ensure that not just the health and the rates of mortality, but also the educational issues and the financial impact, that those things also get the attention that they deserve. I need not tell you that there will be tremendous economic fallout, for example, after this pandemic. And as we know, that fallout will in fact disproportionately affect Black people. Because we were already disproportionately impacted by wealth inequities, wealth disparities, that will increase and that will be exacerbated, unfortunately, for us as unemployment rates rise, as people are laid off and furloughed and so on. So I'm hoping that, a different group of people will come together to think about a collective strategy to communicate the needs and experiences of African-American people and workers and families and communities, as we think about the economics. But today, I want us to think about education, right? Similarly to the health inequities and the economic inequities, there have been longstanding educational inequities that have persistently and at times quite violently, as a matter of fact, impacted African-American families and students. So I want us to, do the best that we can in the hour that we have. I would be remiss if I didn't invite you to a national town hall that my dear friend and colleague, Tyrone Howard at UCLA and I are co-hosting this Friday. You see the information here is Friday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, 12 o'clock Pacific. This is a free national town hall. You can register at no cost at bit.ly Black Town Hall. Professor Howard and I are bringing together principals and school leaders, Black teachers, Black parents and family members. I think we have a Black student or two joining us, as well as some health professionals who can help us think about, what is it that we need to consider as we fast forward into sending Black children into what we know to be chronically underfunded schools, for example, when we return back to school. We're going to have some health professionals to help us think about, those kinds of issues. So again, it's this Friday. At this point, more than 1,300 people across the country have registered, and we invite you to join us for that virtual town hall. I want to start here and, maybe I'll talk for about 15, 20-ish minutes, and then I'll stop and just invite all of your questions at that time. Do feel free to, put them in the chat now, and I'll ask for some assistance on the other end and, helping me sift through those. But, as we're thinking about strategic communication, I want to be clear about at least who I think it is that we ought to be communicating to as we think about the specific impact that COVID-19 is having on African-American students and their schooling experiences. First and foremost, I think our target communication audience is other African-American parents and families. I have gotten a very real sense from friends of mine, as well as from my engagement on social media in, over the past 6 weeks, that there have been particular experiences that individual Black parents and individual Black families have been having with their children's schools that, they thought were just happening to them. But actually, as I began to hear more of these stories and read more of the accounts on social media, I began to realize that what people are experiencing are not just sort of one-offs. It's not just that their district or their school or their particular child's teacher aren't rising to the occasion to give them the kind of support and resources that they need, but instead that this actually seems to be, a bit of a pandemic in and of itself, right? The inequities that have long disadvantaged Black children is in fact a pandemic that has not gotten the attention that it deserves, and it is only being exacerbated during this time. So I think that as we think about strategic communication strategies, this is a real opportunity for us to help Black parents understand that this isn't just you, right? It isn't just your community, but it really is a thing that is affecting Black families across the nation. And therefore, my hope is that it inspires us to coalition. I do have, in a few minutes, some strategies around coalition building that we'll come back to. But first, target audience, Black parents and families. Second, school boards and school leaders. Certainly, we have more power. We are more persuasive when we go together, when we communicate together as a collective about the needs of Black children and students in K-12 schools across the country. I am not at all attempting to rob an individual parent or a set of parents from their agency to advocate on behalf of their child or their children. But what I am saying, though, is that when we go together with a common message, with a strategic message and a strategic set of actions, that we're much more likely to get the attention of school boards and individual school leaders. So that's another audience. A third is certainly elected officials and policymakers. There will be some funds invested in post-COVID-19 recovery. I was in a forum last week that was focused on community colleges here in California. And it delighted me, as a matter of fact, to hear the Chancellor of the California Community College system, the largest system of higher education in the United States, and he's a Latino man. It delighted me to hear him say that as we think about, lining up to give out resources and to help communities recover from COVID-19, that Black people ought to be first in line. I think he's absolutely right about that. Given the rates of devastation that have disproportionately impacted our communities, thinking about specifically the disproportionate rates of mortality, right? There's going to be a lot of depression, residual grief and trauma. And certainly, again, given the ways that we know that predominantly Black schools or schools in which Black students are most likely to attend are chronically underfunded, it really should be Black kids who are first in line. So, we gotta, in a unified voice, help elected officials and policymakers understand that we as Black people and as people who care about the educational outcomes and success of Black children, that these are the things that you ought to know as you make policy and make determinations about how resources are spent. Certainly, I'm hoping that a target audience can be local, state, and national news media. I started this webinar experience by saying that, a couple weeks ago when I finally started to see the media, give some attention at least to the disproportionate rates of death and infection among Black communities, I'm hoping that, we can do that same thing as coalitions that currently exist, that we leverage in different ways, and perhaps even new coalitions that we create. And lastly, I'm hoping that through these strategic efforts that I'm about to talk about, that they will capture the attention of CAAASA and other professional associations. We already have CAAASA's attention, that's for sure. I was so thrilled when I saw an email from Pedro Noguera a couple weeks ago that had, the whole lineup of sessions that CAAASA will be offering over the next couple of weeks. I thought that was exactly right. In the same way that we have informed this very timely and responsive agenda for CAAASA, I'm also hoping that we can set an agenda that is focused unapologetically on Black students and Black families for other associations of educators and educational leaders, and those who are involved in any way in making determinations about resourcing for education here in California and elsewhere. All right, so those are at least 5 audiences that I had in mind. Let me talk through some social media strategies with you. One would be daily digital diaries, where we either in writing, as individual families or parents, either in writing or on our smartphones. where we capture, sort of everyday realities of, like our children's experiences, like trying to access technology through their schools, or, not having, access to reliable Wi-Fi and high-speed internet, you know, chronicling, how long it's been since your child's teacher has sent you a worksheet, or, the set of materials that you need to, do the best that you can at homeschooling, those kinds of things. But I think they have to be captured, every day, and posted to people's Facebook, Instagram, and, other accounts. It could be that the first one that you post doesn't get very much attention. But I can guarantee you that after day 4 or day 5, that people are going to start to notice that, wait a minute, like, these children are not getting the kinds of support and resources that they need from their schools and from other entities. We got to step up. The technology is insufficient. The instructional plan is insufficient, so on and so forth. So those digital diaries could be helpful. Another would be crowdsourcing common and unique experiences. For example, posting to one's Facebook account. Am I the only one, or is our family the only family that is experiencing XYZ with my kid's school? Two things are going to happen. Others are going to chime in and be like, nope, you're not the only one, and nope, you're not tripping, that you ought to have, higher expectations for, how your children are being educated and served. So that will happen. People will validate that that yours is an experience that is also being had elsewhere. But simultaneously, people will post and say, well, yeah, actually, this happened to us and this is what we did. Here are some resources that we were able to tap into, or here's some things that you can do, or here's how we talk with my child's teacher or principal to get the kind of outcome that we need. So in other words, it would be one way to, in some ways, like, validate your own experience and, start to form a coalition of others. But then it will also be a way to get some answers and some solutions for things that have worked for other Black families. Certainly, this is not novel at all, but it can in fact be extremely powerful. Hashtag campaigns. I have to be honest, it actually surprised me last Thursday when we were doing that forum for California community colleges, that we were trending on Twitter because there was a hashtag Black Student Success that, thousands of people were following, and, ultimately millions of people were retweeting the tweets. So, if you want to get some attention placed on, how Black students and Black families are being left behind educationally during COVID-19, starting, a hashtag, it could be, Black students COVID-19, or whatever the hashtag is, right? It could be a way for, millions, perhaps millions of Black families across California and across the United States to come together to begin to make a thing go viral. And by a thing, I mean like the public consciousness, raising public consciousness about the ways that that Black children are being underserved. A hashtag campaign or set of hashtag campaigns could certainly do that. Let me go back here and just say, I mean, think about, right, like how viral the battle between Babyface and Teddy Riley went. The first time they attempted that and the technology failed, there were more than 500,000 people who had come together at one time on Instagram without very much money being, spent on marketing, right? It was really like through, hashtag coalition building and, the passing around of digital images on social media that brought together 500,000 people to see two music producers, like go through their catalogs from the 80s and 90s. What I think I'm saying here is that imagine if we could bring together 500,000 Black families, really to raise national consciousness, again, about the ways that Black students are being underserved. Digital shorts posted to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and YouTube are incredibly useful. By digital shorts, I mean like, 2-minute videos. In some ways, this is an extension of the first idea about the digital diaries, except the digital diaries you got to do, pretty much every day for, a week or 2 weeks or however long. Whereas a digital short you could do once. And it could be a 2-minute thing that is recorded on your iPhone or your Android or whatever you have, in which you are speaking very candidly, clearly, powerfully about what it is that your family and your child is experiencing. And, we should make a space for that. By we, I guess I'm going to commit right now, actually, that the USC Race and Equity Center on our YouTube channel, we will create a space for Black parents and families to upload videos in which you articulate what it is that you need or what it is that you are experiencing in your child's school or district. Right after this webinar, I'm going to give these slides to the organizers, and I will include some instructions about how to get videos to us so that we can post them to our YouTube channel and use hashtags and all of that stuff to help promote them. So that's the thing that I can commit to right now that our center will do on behalf of the folk who are represented here. Just a couple more. Last week I signed on to a letter that was going to, actually I signed on to 2 letters, one on behalf of myself last week and another, as Africa mentioned, I'm president of the American Educational Research Association, AERA. AERA signed on to a letter last week that was going to Congress on the racism, denouncing the racism that Asian and Asian American people are experiencing here in the United States in this COVID-19 moment. So the organization I lead signed on to that last week, but as an individual, I signed on to another letter that was being floated around digitally. And, at this point now, thousands of signatures have been gathered. That could be a strategy, right? To lay out a set of experiences pertaining to the educational underserving of Black students across the country, getting Black parents and families to sign on to it, and having all of the people who sign on to it then pass it on to their respective Congress people within their states and within districts within their states. That could be a thing that like really goes viral like very quickly. And you're not just capturing the attention of Maxine Waters here in California, but really all of Maxine's colleagues in states across the country by getting, again, Black families to sign on to these things and then passing them on to their local Congress people and elected officials. Certainly live tweeting during the CNN town halls. I have a confession here. I'm a bit of a CNN junkie, and I have actually been impressed with the COVID-19 town halls that Sanjay Gupta, Anderson Cooper, and others have been doing in recent weeks. At a certain point, we ought to organize a takeover where it's just a bunch of Black people just like tweeting and sending in a bunch of Black focused questions about, certainly health and medical related things, economic related things, but also education related things. Just imagine like if all of the questions that are flying in are about like Black people and Black disproportionality and Black suffering and the needs and experiences of Black people. I am a notorious multitasker. So I'm able to, when I watch those programs, I'm able to both watch Sanjay and Anderson and what they're saying, but I'm also reading the ticker across the bottom. And, there are all of these questions that are coming in the ticker. Those questions are unfortunately quite raceless. They're broad questions like, I don't know, like, should I like drink bleach? Or should I leave my groceries out in the garage for 3 hours after I come back from the grocery store? Those kinds of things. Listen, I don't want to minimize the kinds of things that people are caring about across the country, but we ought to care about, right? And we do care about what's happening to Black children. So I would love to see us organize just like a day where we do a Black takeover of these programs and just like send in like tons and tons and tons of Black focused questions. I have an idea about how we can get that done that I'm going to share on the next slide. Local news stations are really good at doing exposés. You know, like when a landlord is, you know, mistreating tenants and those tenants call in to the local news station oftentimes will go to, you know, that place where the slumlord is misbehaving and will do an expose. You know, imagine if we organized through our local news media a series of exposés on the ways in which Black children and Black families are being educationally underserved during this COVID-19 moment. I think that that would actually be a thing that local news stations would care about. You know, they certainly do some coverage around schools generally, but I don't know that there's enough attention being paid to the particular ways in which Black students are being underserved. Last, but certainly not least, you know, virtual town hall forums like the one that Professor Tyrone Howard and I are organizing this Friday. Literally, Tyrone and I came up with this idea about 4:30 last Thursday. And, you know, again, I told you that already more than 1,300 people all across the United States have registered, and we expect, you know, probably twice as many by this Friday. You know, those kinds of forums are not hard to organize, right? We ought to do more of those. As I mentioned earlier, the one that we're doing this Friday will have, you know, educational leaders and a physician and a mental health person, so on and so forth. It could be that you organize your own virtual forum that's just Black parents and families, you know, talking specifically about, you know, their needs and their experiences during this COVID-19 moment. One last idea here is what I'm calling Instagram and Facebook Live panels. What I mean by that is on Instagram, when you go live, you can have someone join you live, right? You know, it's some version of in the Babyface Teddy Riley redo, how, you know, you could see like them both, Babyface up top where he belonged and Teddy Riley, you know, down on the lower end of the screen. I was team Babyface in that whole thing, by the way, if that wasn't clear. But anyway, right, like just imagine having two parents, you know, engaged in a conversation live about what is happening. Let's say it's two parents who have children who attend the same school, right? They could be engaged in a live conversation on Instagram about, again, you know, what's happening educationally in their child's or their children's school. You know, those kinds of things cost no money, but, you know, it could be a real way to bring, you know, thousands, perhaps even millions of people into a national conversation about what's happening with Black children. I said I'd talk for about 20 minutes. It looks like it's 1:28, so let me run very quickly through some coalition building strategies. As Africa said in the beginning, you know, this particular webinar is as much about social and digital media strategies as it is about coalition building. So what might we do to build coalitions so that it's not just, you know, random one or two of us doing these kinds of things that I just talked about, but, you know, it's a whole like cadre of people. Certainly we could, you know, leverage existing associations and networks like CAAASA, you know, who has a long-standing pulse on Black communities and are able to organize Black folk, you know, fairly easily through existing networks and existing listservs and so on. Certainly organizing parents and family members through churches, mosques, and other places of religious worship. It surprises me, I have to be honest. I am a lifelong Christian. I'm a person who, you know, at least before I moved to California 3 years ago, like was very much in church, like a lot. It surprises me that churches are not used oftentimes as a space to like really like manufacture, honestly, the kind of coalitions and collective like action in response to the educational underserving of Black children. Like, I just don't, I just don't get it. And my father is a pastor, and I've talked with him about this. I think that churches are among the lowest hanging fruit that we could use in organizing Black families and Black communities around, you know, the kinds of issues and the kinds of strategies um, that I talked about on the previous slide. Certainly activating existing Black parent and family groups that exist on social media can be another way to build coalition. You know, there are these Facebook groups um, for Black families that already exist. You know, tapping into those groups and, you know, just like really leading with the question, what can we do together to help raise public consciousness about what our children and families are experiencing? I can guarantee you that folks are going to, in a very grassroots kind of way, in those groups, start to think about, you know, strategies that you all might employ. Certainly creating new Black parent and family groups on social media, ones that don't currently exist, um, is another way to build coalition. So I think what I'm calling for here is a both and strategy. You may not need to go out and completely recreate the wheel. There are groups that already exist, but there could also be new groups that you start. And perhaps groups that are specifically focused on COVID-19 and what to do about COVID-19. It could be that you create specialized subgroups in social media, in Facebook and so on. For example, Black fathers who barber, right? Thinking about fathers of Black children who work in barbershops, leveraging, creating a group like that, and, you know, like finding out from that group, you know, what is it that your children are experiencing educationally right now during the pandemic? What is it that your families need? And what is it that you can do? But also more importantly, or as importantly, what is it that your children's principal and superintendent can do? What is it that you would want your governor and your mayor to do? You know, those are ways to, you know, really collect feedback from folks who share, you know, either occupational interests or some other sort of common identities that might bring them together in these virtual groups that could be created. Certainly creating new neighborhood associations. What I mean by new is that I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. In fact, my neighborhood was entirely Black. Everybody, you know, like for several blocks in the place where I grew up in South Georgia were Black. We certainly were in community with each other, but I don't know that we ever thought of ourselves as an association, as a leverageable association, an association that can be leveraged. What I think is sort of interesting about this idea is that because we all lived right there together, obviously then all of the children went to the neighborhood schools that were in walking distance of our neighborhood. Imagine if we were able to bring all of those parents and families together. I understand right now we got to stand 6 feet apart and we got to wear a mask and all that stuff. So maybe that's not the way. Maybe you do it by, you know, finding all of your Black neighbors on Facebook and, you know, creating a group with them where they can together articulate, first take stock of, and then ultimately articulate what it is that their children in their specific neighborhood are experiencing in their local school, and then communicate that, you know, as a collective. That is a way. Lastly here, certainly empowering Black parents and family members to recruit 5 new people into networks that you start. So these coalitions that you begin, you know, think about, sorry, this is gonna be my last church reference, my last Black church reference. You know, think about, you know, Friends and Family Day at church, where you're supposed to bring like 5 people who are not members of the church, like 5 friends and family members of yours. Imagine bringing 5 friends and family members into, a digital coalition that is employing a range of social and digital media strategies to raise consciousness, again, about the collective experiences that our students and our families are having with schools during the pandemic. Okay, so I will stop here and invite some questions. Yeah, so I'm going to stop here. I'll leave this up so that you can take down the URL for the national forum for this Friday. But yeah, let me stop here and invite questions.
All right, what I was going to say too, and this is up to you, totally up to you, Dr. Harper. I copied down the bit.ly link for this Friday and I shared it in the chat. I can share it again if you want to stop sharing just to have your face, just so we can be able to see your face while we have the discussion. And then feel free to definitely, to put it back up whenever you want to.
Perfect.
One of the questions that came through a bit earlier was asking about, like, definitely hearing that we're talking about Black families. One of the participants wanted to know if this is inclusive of families that are biracial or multiracial. Would you be able to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I use Black inclusively, for sure. So definitely inclusive of multiracial families, definitely inclusive of Black immigrant families. So not just African Americans, but also Black immigrants, including Black immigrant families who may be undocumented. What I'm going to say here, though, is that when we take stock of what students and families are experiencing, students and families who are Black, it will be irresponsible of us to not disaggregate those experiences based on, those various identities and sort of makeups that I just described. So what I think I'm saying is that African American families in, say, South Central LA are likely having a very different experience than multiracial Black families in Brentwood right now during the pandemic. Both are important experiences to take stock of and to communicate and figure out what the needs are, the unmet needs, but they're different. So I think we want to be as precise and as specific as possible when we are calling for resources and calling for interventions in response to the impact of the pandemic on Black people. We got to be specific about which Black people we're talking about, if that makes sense.
All right, so I'm looking, and there's some folks who are sharing questions. I'm going to share them. Some of it I don't necessarily get the context, so I'm not in California, but I'll share with you, and maybe you do.
Okay.
So one person is asking, that says that they live in Carson, and they would love to have more information about what GCFI is doing. Do you know what GCFI is?
I have no idea.
Okay, so okay, so that question is probably, we probably need a bit more context for that. I don't know if that was for other people in the session or for you in particular.
Okay.
And I'm looking through to see, okay, yeah, there's someone who talked about the Academic Center for Excellence at GCFI in Carson. I think they were making reference to someone else. There's lots of folks who definitely shared in the chat that they really appreciated the resources around, like, using the hashtags to truly try to connect, the efforts to communicate about Black students and Black families, and had asked about. Definitely.
Can I jump in on that one
please.
A second?
Yeah.
This may sound a little harsh. It may even sound a bit judgmental. Let me not be a hypocrite, because I sometimes do it too. I love Black Twitter. I find it as a space for like very refreshing, tremendous, like, comic relief. Like, I go there and I search the hashtags and I just find things that make me laugh. Here's the judgmental part. We use hashtags for very silly things, right? Like, things to make people laugh. I like comedy. I like laughing. But I don't know that we use hashtags for serious things like what I'm calling for here, right? Like, finding ways to create a unifying hashtag for Black parents and families, to come together, to unite nationally, to help raise consciousness about the experiences and the tragedy that is occurring in Black communities across the country. I want us to do that, and I want us to do it in ways that we frankly made the Babyface versus Teddy Riley hashtag go viral. Like I think that there's just so much potential left on the table there, but unfortunately we use those hashtags for silly things.
I definitely agree with you, because I will go and see Black Twitter, but I think we can it doesn't have to be like only for fun things, right, or silly things. We can do both, right? We can, because we're complex individuals, right? Definitely. Right. All right, so we have one participant who's asking, what are some ways that you are seeing Black children be underserved during COVID-19?
Sure. One of the things that is just like absolutely heartbreaking for me right now is, given what we know to be the disproportionate rates of mortality in Black communities, it surprises me that there isn't more conversation about what that does to Black children, Black students, and how that is disproportionately, inevitably going to impact their mental and emotional wellness. Let me see if I could put this differently. If relative to our representation in a population, say in Chicago is one of these places where Black folks were like 30 or 32% of the population in Chicago, but more than 70% of the deaths from COVID-19 were Black folks. Well, those Black folks who died have children, many of them, and nieces and nephews and grandkids who lost folks, like in disproportionately higher numbers. And that for sure is going to impact their educational performance. It's really hard to perform well educationally when you're depressed and when you're grieving and when you have unmet mental and emotional wellness needs. So yeah, that's one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot. Certainly the technology gaps have been written about a bit in recent weeks, how, like, as there's like this mad dash to move courses online, yeah, if you don't have a computer with the camera, then how are you going to Zoom with your teacher and with your class? Right? There was a very classist presumption made about, who would have access to, remote learning when we just went and threw these classes online.
Right, except not only the devices, but like the actual access to Wi-Fi, so the devices connect online as well, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? I think one last thing that I'll throw on the table here is, there was this really provocative photo that I saw last week, or maybe the week before, of a student sitting on the curb outside of a Subway sandwich shop. The student was out there because he was using the free Wi-Fi that Subway, offers his patrons, because he didn't have Wi-Fi at home. We've also been hearing stories of students who live in, one-bedroom apartments with, 5 other family members. All 5 of you can't be on the Wi-Fi, and you can't be a student focused on doing your homework and doing the worksheets and all that stuff when there's 5 other people in a 1-bedroom. So those kinds of things.
Thank you so much for that. Another question that came through is asking you if you're familiar with the Beyond the Schoolhouse report.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of it.
Okay, so there's a follow-up question if you are. So if you are, can you highlight some of the key findings and how they can augment your message?
Yeah.
And it also says, go Trojans.
Yeah,
you must get that.
Right on. This is a really, really, really good day to be a Trojan. Just hours ago, our university announced that Pedro Noguera is the new dean starting July 1st of the USC Rossier School of Education, which I'm just absolutely excited about. So Pedro, now Dean Noguera, was one of the co-authors of the Beyond the Schoolhouse report. One of the things that I thought that he and Professor Howard did so masterfully was that they used, a range of publicly available data and statistics to help us understand how Black students are systematically being underserved, and how when we look at just about every statistical metric of educational progress, performance, and attainment, it's Black kids who are at the bottom almost always. So for me, the implications of that report, during this moment of pandemic is that we're going to see bad go to worse. And, I'm usually a fairly optimistic person. I'm a very happy person, but I'm unhappy about what I know will happen to Black children if we don't come together and leverage a range of methodologies. So today, I only talked about social and digital media. I did not mean to suggest that that's the only thing that we can do. I mean, there are other things, and I'm really happy that other people in this webinar series are touching on those other things. I think those other things are really important. But here's what I will say about that wonderful report that my two great friends co-wrote. They did such a great job with the research and the writing and the dissemination from their respective centers at UCLA. So this isn't on them, it's on us. We did not do enough with that report. We being Black families, Black communities, Black folks who care about, Black student success, Black associations, we didn't do enough with that report to, raise national consciousness, raise consciousness across California about the ways that Black students are being underserved. Let us not do that, mishandle, the pandemic effects on Black students in that same way. And furthermore, it's not too late, by the way, for us to re-engage Beyond the Schoolhouse and, other reports like it, and bring those things into conversation with the COVID-19 messages. But it will be such a ridiculously, tragically wasted opportunity to have data all around us right now about how Black students are being underserved during the pandemic, and to not come together through digital media, social media, and a range of other strategies.
Thank you for that as well. There's another question that came through asking, what are some bright spots or best practices that teachers are implementing to better support Black students and families during this time?
Sorry if this sounds like totally self-promoting. In some ways, in an unapologetic way, it is. Come to the forum on Friday. It's free. We actually have gotten a Black teacher who was recently highlighted for the extraordinary work that she was doing to reach Black children and Black families. So I want you, honestly, I want you to come and hear firsthand from her. If you are unable to join us at noon Pacific or 3 o'clock Eastern time, or wherever you are in the world on Friday, we will be posting it immediately after to the USC Race and Equity Center's YouTube channel. And Tyrone Howard will be posting it to the Pritzker Center's website and their social media accounts there at UCLA. Yeah, but I'm deliberately leaving this one as a cliffhanger so that folks come to the forum to hear firsthand from this sister who is just, I think, just doing such a remarkable job. Here's what I will say though, right? So we found her honestly because she had been written about. What we haven't done though, right, is invited through, some of the very social media strategies that I've talked with you about. We've not invited Black educators across the country to tell us, what they're doing well. This is a perfect example of a kind of question that can be tweeted or posted in Facebook or an image could be posted with the question, on it and posted to Instagram, and then people reply in their comments. What are educators doing well to serve Black students during the pandemic? I bet if we asked that question, I bet that people would have examples of bright spots. It's a good idea. It's going to be my next set of tweets and Facebook posts as soon as I disconnect this webinar. So yeah, I think you should do that as well through your various accounts. All right, it looks like we have 10 minutes left, so I'll try to be more succinct in answering the next few questions.
All right, so there is a question in about that. What suggestions do you have to engage more African American students in distance learning? Because I think it's related to the second part of that is that our district provided device and the students pick them up, but are not engaging in the learning tasks.
Yeah. To be honest, look, I know a lot about a lot, but I don't know everything. Distance learning isn't my area of expertise, but and sorry if I sound like sort of like a one-trick pony in this particular response, but it is precisely the kind of question that we ought to be leveraging these social media platforms for, right? There are people across the United States and perhaps even in other places in the world who have the answer to that particular question. Some of them are technologists who, very much know a whole lot more about distance learning than do I and can weigh in. But some of them are also, Black parents and family members who can say, oh, well, this is what is working for my child. These are the ways that I was able to get, the students that I'm homeschooling, to, really use their devices, right? So I encourage you to, leverage your social media platforms to get answers to questions like this one. I bet it's one that will come up in Friday's forum, for which there will be, actual answers from school leaders and others.
All right, another question is, my concern is that the academic divide is growing. Any conversation happening around how to address the long-term impact of what is happening now? I know the short-term requires attention as well, but some of the short-term solutions are not addressing these issues.
Sure, yeah, I love this question. Honestly, I put this particular webinar together just for this audience. I've actually never given a presentation on this topic. But as I was putting it together for today, like low-key, like an hour ago, every time that I was like writing COVID-19, I was thinking, yeah, these are things that we can and should be doing right now. But like really, there are things that we can and should be doing always. These are, tools that we should be leveraging, technologies that we should be leveraging always, like in a during, and post-pandemic moment. It goes back to the question about the, sort of linking what I was talking about to the Beyond the Schoolhouse report. The strategies that I talked about are things that we should have been doing when that report came out, right? Things that we should have been doing after the report was released. So I think what I'm saying here is that I believe quite convincingly, quite strongly, even though I just put the slides together an hour ago, I have been thinking about this quite extensively for quite some time. I'm confident that these are sustainable strategies that can be replicated, beyond the current moment.
Another question is, what steps would you recommend school and district leaders who are concerned about Black student disproportionality take to improve the outcomes?
Sure. Certainly, some of the strategies that I talked about, all the strategies that I talked about on that second slide, the expose with the local media, the leveraging, churches and mosques and other places of religious worship, where you like literally have like dozens, sometimes hundreds, or sometimes even thousands of Black families that are part of like one unit. You know, like having those kinds of coalitions, you know, employing all of those strategies can very much, you know, lead to moving the needle on the outcomes. I'm going to connect this question to the previous one, because just as I was moving on from it, I thought about a moment, even in my own career. So I mentioned that I moved to USC 3 years ago. Before then, I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I founded the center that is now the USC Race and Equity Center. It was the Penn Race and Equity Center when I was at Penn. We released a report in 2015 that was an analysis of suspension and expulsion rates for Black students in 3,022 school districts across 13 southern states. And the data in the report were presented for every single district, and it was organized state by state across those 13 states. The day after the report came out, a group of Black parents, along with the NAACP in Richmond, Virginia, called an emergency meeting in response to the data that was in the report that showed tremendous disproportionality for Black students in their school discipline. And, you know, these were not academics. These were Black citizens, Black grandmothers and grandfathers and parents and aunties and uncles who came together because they saw the data and they wanted to do something. The something they did was sued. They used the data in a lawsuit, right? I think as we amass evidence about the ways that Black children are being underserved in this pandemic moment, as well as after the pandemic, and the ways in which, frankly, they've chronically been underserved, you know, over time. As we begin to document that and amass stories and help families understand that, no, it wasn't just your kid, right, who experienced this, but, you know, this is a pandemic in and of itself. This is an experience that far too many Black students and Black families have. You know, those kinds of leveraging evidence in that way could be used, you know, in lawsuits and legislative efforts to get policies passed and so on. I'll stop here. We have maybe time for one more question.
I think a lot of what's coming through in the end is more so comments and folks reaching out to one another. One thing I do want to reiterate, and this is one thing I mentioned at the beginning, is when you're sharing in the chat and you're trying to communicate with other attendees, you got to be sure to put it to all panelists and attendees. If you only send to all panelists, only three of us will see it. So I just wanted to reiterate that. But most of it is like, you know, people sharing resources with one another and really kind of undergirding some of the things that you said and shared too. Well, one thing I wanted to definitely share again is I'm gonna drop this into the chat. I want to share the survey for today's session in the chat as well. So that's coming through right now. And then I'm also going to be sharing the link to the website where Dr. Harper's resources will be available after today's session. So you'll be able to see, because I know a lot of the questions that came through as I was looking through them are questions that you addressed in earlier slides in your presentation. So the slide deck will be available on the website that I'm going to drop in. And then on top of that, there's also a way for you to be able to send in additional questions if you feel like you had a question that you wanted to have answered that was not addressed. And so I just wanted to make sure folks had that information. But yeah, a lot of folks are coming through saying now too about like the impact of lawsuits and how we have to really work together because districts have been neglecting Black kids pre-COVID. So we can't just rely only on the districts to solve the problems, that we really need to, like you were saying, like build coalitions and keep moving forward and supporting one another as well. So let me go ahead and drop that link in the chat as well so that folks will be able to have access to that. But yeah, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to say before we wrap up completely. I want to give it to you for a second.
Yeah, yeah, it's 1:59. I definitely want to respect people's time. But, I want to end in the way that I started, with a sincere expression of gratitude that more than 200 people took time out of their day to come together to think about, social and digital media strategies that you might employ. I hope this has been useful. Again, join us on Friday for the National Town Hall. Inevitably, there will be, tons of useful guidance and recommendations and resources offered there. It won't be just me talking. Fortunately, we've, really recruited others. And, certainly, do feel free to be in touch with me. Here's my contact info here on the closing slide. It also includes a link to the website for the USC Race and Equity Center. So yeah, I'm just really, really, really grateful that I was afforded this opportunity to be with you. Everybody continue to be well and continue to do all that you can to ensure that Black students get the equity and the success that they deserve.
Absolutely. Well, thank you too, Dr. Harper, for all that you shared here too. And I dropped in the chat the bit.ly for the Black Town Hall as well, so folks can just click on that link if they choose to. And I dropped in your email address, and it'll be available also on the slide deck on the website. So thank you to everyone. It seems like folks are excited about the town hall on Friday, so that's good. So hopefully we'll continue to collaborate and to really, dream big for what's possible and support one another in getting there.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Africa.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure. Bye.